painful. All of that processing actually goes on in the brain, and sleep disturbance interferes with that pain processing, so that those pain signals are prioritized and the brain perceives them as more painful. So that's called upregulation of the signal. So the signal comes in and then it's like a dial. It just gets turned up like a volume dial, so that that pain signal is much, much louder. And that's because of the disturbed sleep. Essentially, what disturbed sleep does is it stops you from being able to have control over that pain signal and how it's perceived.
And I suppose you could also say it prevents you being able to cope with your pain. And that's how I related to it. So I had a shoulder injury, and it was affecting my ability to go to sleep, and it was waking me up during my sleep. And then I was grumpy at work, and people were getting grumpy with me back, and then that was making the pain worse. So then it was harder to go to sleep, and then I woke up even more, and that went on for a long time. And I can remember halfway through it thinking, is this for life? Am I going for life? And then the emotional, oh my God, what happens if this is for life? So it all interconnects really quite importantly. So trying to help them have good quality sleep is really quite important, isn't it?
Definitely. And actually for human patients, one of the drugs that they can have prescribed to them is actually sleeping tablets to try and break that cycle. Now, often that isn't appropriate for dogs for various reasons, because we can't communicate with dogs in the same way as we can with humans. So we don't necessarily know what's going on. So for us, it's much more important for our dogs to break that cycle with comfort. We need to be able to provide them with a comfortable sleeping area, and there are several things to consider with that. It has to be firm enough so that they're not floundering around trying to get out of their bed, because that's going to cause them a lot more pain. You know, some of these really, really soft beds are great to get into and might be great to sleep in, but they're really difficult to get out of. You know, you've got to have a firm enough place for them to be able to tip themselves up onto their feet quite easily. And then looking for whether the dog prefers a raised bed or a bed on the floor, and making sure that bed is at the right height. So it looks like the dog is using as little effort as possible to get up and get down again. That's what you want to be looking for. So that height's going to be different for each dog, depending on, you know, how big your dog is, for instance. And then really,
I just need to add to that, because my little pet hates is when you see beds and the person very lovingly puts some cuddly toys and some blankets and a fleecy bit, and
no room.
This is just going to be a trip hazard, and they're going to get their feet caught up in the blankets, and you see them trying to go, oh, I don't really know where to sleep now because I'm going to lay on something. So one of the things that I do with my owners is I really I teach them that it's okay that the bed is quite plain, and it's not billowing, and the more sequins and fluff it has does not make it a better bed. That really is something that's really important. The more fluff and patches and twinkles and name badges doesn't make it a better bed. Actually, quite often the plain, simple, predictable, reasonably firm, big enough beds are way better.
Yeah, definitely. And there is good research showing that being able to lay out flat as opposed to curling up into a smaller, rounder bed is really important for getting into some of those deep sleep phases. So, I mean, I always provide my dogs with a mixture of options. So they've got the kind of smaller, rounded bed if they decide they want to curl up like a little pussycat, but they've always got options for lying flat out so they can really get into that nice, deep state of sleep. And it is
another little tangent there, because again, this is, you've heard me say this 100 times. Also, when dogs get up from sleeping, they're quite often quite stiff for that initial period. I think all of us are like that. You get out of bed and you're like, oh, I've just got to loosen up a little bit. And if you have something like arthritis, you're going to be worse. That stiffness is going to be there for longer and possibly more severe. Do not have a slippery floor around the bed, because that's like getting out of bed onto an ice rink, and it's something that can be so easily changed. So can I tangent us into about the house, about other things that really prick your ears up, where you're thinking,
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think it's not just about, you know, the point that you made about making sure that they can get traction when they're getting up and getting down is really important to avoid slips, trips and further injury, and also micro injury, those little injuries that are created because the dog is having to try extra hard to grip the floor and make sure it doesn't fall over. But interestingly also, that type of environment tends to be associated with a high level of anxiety because the dog knows from experience that it needs to pay attention to how it's placing its feet and where its body weight is to avoid slipping and tripping, because it will have had, you know, one or two bad experiences. So the dog learns that that floor is slippery and therefore is anxious about moving around on the floor. And anxiety, again, changes that pain perception. So as soon as the pain signals are coming in, those pain signals, the volume is being dialed up again in animals and humans that have anxiety.